This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a podcast about coaching, leadership, and leading through coaching. And here's your host, Scott Gress.
Hi, welcome to the Coaching Leader Podcast. We understand that there's a great need for leadership in the world, and specifically the church. And that means that we have to work hard at developing leaders. But one of the problems with developing leaders is that for many of us, we're just not exactly sure what to do to help people grow as leaders. Well, in this podcast, in this particular episode, I'd like to share some of my journey in my thinking about how to develop leaders. Starting out very young, when I was in high school, I was part of a youth ministry and was kind of thrown into a position of responsibility. And the youth leader at the time said, "Hey, if you presume to teach, you're going to be graded by a higher standard." And he got our attention that we needed to do it and do it well. And so we felt a sense of responsibility. We felt a sense to do it well because these people were going to be affected by us. We were going to be working with junior hires at that point as high school leaders. And then in college, when I was part of a ministry in college, and I took on positions of responsibility, I was looking around at other college-age people who were leading small groups or leading the large group meeting or leading music or helping people to evangelize and whatever. And it occurred to me, you know what? People that age can do a lot, and they can be really, really good. You step up to the degree that other people believe in you and encourage you. And where you have a sense of ownership that, it's up to me to make it happen. Well, after college, I got involved in the business world, but then quickly went to seminary where we were taught what we were supposed to know. And that's really important. That's foundational. But we also found ourselves preaching, found ourselves leading worship, found ourselves teaching, directing and leading groups, even though for much of those things, we hadn't done that before. And sometimes it went well, and other times it didn't go so well. As I talked to some of the other seminarians about their experience in growing, especially on their internship, or what we called their vicarage. And it often had to do with the kind of vicarage supervisor or internship supervisor that we had. Then in the early 2000s, I earned a master's degree in leadership, and I received some formal training. But it still didn't really answer the question, how do you develop others? Well, after that degree program, I began to be concerned that the way I was always doing things was going to be so powerful, and it was going to have such gravity that it would pull me back to always doing the things in the way that I did them before, in spite of what I might have learned in this master's program. And so I thought, well, how can I keep up with that, and how can I continue to grow? And through conversations with other people, it came to me that leadership comes down to conversations, and I wanted to learn how to do that better. And so I pursued formal coach training through, at that time, what was called the Coaches Training Institute, what's still probably the largest coach training school in the world in 70 plus or more countries. Now they call themselves co-active training. And so I invested in that training. And here's where I was surprised. I went to that training, which was a number of weekends, long weekends, where you sit in this training event for, 8, 10 hours at a time. And instead of You sitting down with your nose in a book with a 3-ring binder that they handed out that you're supposed to take notes on, you didn't have any of that. Well, they gave you some materials, but it was usually sitting under your seat. And they would say a few words, maybe 10 minutes with a co-leader, talk with them and talk with us as a group. We were kind of sitting in a circle, in a horseshoe. And then they'd set us off, have us do some kind of an activity to try on for size what they had taught us. And boy, it was like jumping into the deep end. You kind of had to try this thing that they had just talked to you about. And if you didn't quite listen or didn't quite get it, you were lost. It wasn't a sink or swim. You had another learner there with you that you were partnering with. You always had to partner up with somebody else. You tried it on for size, and then you would sit down and they'd debrief what happened. Boy, that was different. It was a stretch for me because I was so used to, and I liked the idea that you could just sit back, get the download and information from other people, look at the materials, maybe review it in your room later on that night, and then come back and do it again the next day. But not here. You were learning by doing. And that was fabulous. Far different from the way I had been trained in the past. Now, with all that as sort of history, let me take you fast forward to about 2008, I think it was. Was granted a sabbatical, about 3 months off, and for part of that time I went to the Cape Cod Institute. And if you're not familiar, it's a learning event in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and each one of the weeks had a number of different classes that were available. I happened to pick one that was presented by Dr. Edgar Schein. And if you don't know that name, he's the guy who really was sort of the father of process leadership, organizational leadership. And he wrote some of those great books on leadership development and organizational leadership and culture and organizations. And since then, he's written these wonderful books on helping and how to help people. But during a break, happened to walk up to him and introduce myself, and we got to talking, which is really not normal for me because I'm just not the type to, kind of wait around and talk to the teacher. But as we were talking, he heard that I was an ordained Lutheran pastor, and I had some coach training. And we got to talking, and he got real close to me, and he started talking about how he was the shadow consultant to another consultant who was working with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And he also shared with me some personal things, which were fascinating and were moving and touching for me, that he would share those things with me. But anyway, he shared the name of Russ Bredhold, who was a consultant. And as a consultant, Russ Bredhold was working with the Missouri Synod on the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Synod structure and governance. Now, like I said, this was back in the late 2000s. And he said, and Edgar Schein said that he was a shadow consultant for this consultant. And our conversation went on, and then it was time to go back to class. Well, when I got home, I started looking up this guy. Who's this guy, Russ Bredhold? And I saw some of his materials, and I looked at some of his materials, and he was talking about leadership development. And he wrote something that I found to be incredibly, incredibly interesting. He said, experience is the best teacher, but it's not enough. It's what's kind of experience and what the leader takes away from that experience that counts. And he quoted somebody who said, experience is a hard teacher. She gives the test first and the lessons afterwards. And I thought, oh, wow, that is fantastic stuff. And he said, we fail to learn from experience when there's a lack of timely feedback, when we fail to acknowledge or become aware of the mistakes that we make from our experience, where we don't experience the consequences of our decisions. So maybe we just, work on something, tell people what to do, and then we leave, but we don't have to live with the results. And we may be self-deceived in our own opinions without correction. So he's really leaning on this experience, and it's resonating with me because of my training with Coactive Training, the Coaches Training Institute, and just getting thrown into the deep end, and how that we had to try it on for size and practice what they had just briefly told us about. But then in Russ Bredhold's material, he said 70% of development is experience. And the rest, the 30%, is spread out over education and training and reading and mentoring and so forth. But 70% is experience. That stuck with me, and that made a lot of sense. That reminded me of all those people who did that on-the-job training. Maybe those people who were apprentice, plumbers or electricians or carpenters, where somebody took them under their wings and, said, well, you try this, now try this, and now do this. And then they'd talk about it. It reminded me of some of my experience as an intern or as a vicar, a student pastor, where we'd talk about what just happened as we drove away in the car. Spending that time, that windshield time, debriefing my experience. And I thought, of course, that makes total sense. But then later on, I read about a model that was created in the 1980s by three researchers and authors working with the Center for Creative Leadership. And the model's creators hold that hands-on experience, that 70%, is most beneficial for employees because it enables them to discover and refine their job-related skills, make decisions, address challenges, interact with influential people, such as bosses and mentors and within their work settings. And they also learn from their mistakes and thus receive immediate feedback on their performance. Then they say that 20% of the 30 remaining percent, 20% comes from other people. Collaborative learning and interactions with peers, including some mentoring, with a key ingredient being encouragement and feedback. And then they say that 10% comes from classroom learning and formal coursework. So even at times when, even though we currently, during the pandemic, for example, can't send people in the face-to-face classrooms, 90% of our development should come from other models anyway. Isn't that amazing? Later, now knowing that this came about in the 80s, later it's certainly been looked at again by other studies and by other researchers, and they've adjusted some of those percentages because so much of it now, of our learning and the content, comes through online and videos and so forth. But it really kind of falls down to those big categories that Russ Bredhold talks about of 70% debriefed experience and 30% other things. And incidentally, Bredhold talked about the context being extremely important, that everybody who is learning has a particular context. Their job, where they work, the kind of work that they do, the purpose of that organization, and then that shapes and directs what you're going to learn, when you're going to learn it, how you're going to learn it, and so forth. But all of this ties in with beautifully with adult education theory, that adults learn differently from children. Maybe children are more adept to sitting in classrooms because it's all new, but adults have a different knowledge base, and there's a challenge with time. They don't want to waste their time on something that's irrelevant. They become very impatient quickly, so they want something that is relevant. And Some of those adult education points are that adults prefer learning by doing, learning by experience. They're interested in learning something that has immediate relevance to them. They don't want to waste time on other kinds of things that aren't connected to them. They prefer, adults do, a hands-on approach to learning. And they prefer to solve actual problems. So, what's the point? When it comes to developing other people, when it comes to developing leaders, there's a place for classroom learning, for teaching people particular things. But far more powerful is putting them in a context or a responsibility where they can learn by doing and then have that debriefed experience afterwards. Kind of what that saying is experience is a hard teacher. She gives the test first and the lessons afterwards. So allow people to go in to something where they don't quite know all the answers. Let them struggle, let them work with what they've got, but then help them to learn the lessons afterwards. So let's get even more practical. We want to give people meaningful things to do. Sure, we could model it for them and help them get started and be there to give them support and that encouragement so that they will feel capable, because we believe in them, to go and try these things on for size, kind of like that apprentice model. Okay, here's how you swing a hammer. Here's how you hold a nail without slamming on your fingers. Now put the board up like this. Measure twice, cut once. However that works. In a ministry setting, it can be, let me take you with me when I make hospital calls. The first time, you just watch what I do. And then on the way home, we're going to debrief. What did you see? What did you learn? What did you think? The second time, why don't you greet them and lead in some of that dialogue beforehand? Maybe the second time we get together with them, the third time, you offer the opening prayer. I'll have the Bible reading and the closing prayer. But we're always debriefing afterwards, learning by doing. You can't make microwave leaders. It's going to take a while. You have to help them live into that experience and try things on for size, to learn from their mistakes, to help debrief what they went through. It's an apprentice model. So the practical applications are: give them parts of a task and help talk with them about it along the way, both before and after. Debrief what happened. Answer their questions afterwards. Give them encouragement. You're helping them with that 70%. So when it comes to developing leaders in ministry, you can't just throw them a book and say, here, be a Sunday school teacher, here's the leader's guide. No, it takes a while. It takes some focused effort. Wish that it could be easier. Sometimes we like to short circuit it by saying, well, we got this person who's already done it. We know that they're going to say yes, but we're always leaning on the same people. That's not good. So look around at people who have some capacity for taking responsibility, and then help them along the way to grow into that capacity for taking responsibility. But it's going to take time. And so be willing to invest in other people and invest that time. How rewarding is that? And here's the kicker. As they grow in responsibility, as they grow in leaders, guess what? It's going to be very much like what happened to me when I was in high school. As I knew that I was working with junior hires, I had a responsibility for these junior hires in their Christian faith. So you better believe I'm going to take it very seriously about my faith. And I found myself reading the Bible more, praying more, going to church and paying attention more, being more devoted in my own spiritual life. And the same is going to be true with those people that you help to develop. That as they take more responsibility in leadership in Christian ministry, guess what? They're also going to be taking their faith more seriously because they know that it's so, so important. Well, think about that and remember that 70% of leadership development is debriefed experience. So how are we going to give them experience that then we can help them by debriefing with them? Well, thanks for listening and thanks for watching. And keep tuned in to this channel. We'd love and appreciate if you would rate and review this on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And reach out to us if you'd like to partner a little bit in your leadership development. We do leadership training, we do coach training. We also work with organizations, congregations, and we coach individuals. So God bless you in your leadership development.